How you doing, guys? This is Eric from secretoftheinternet.com, rulethewasteland.com. Got into an interesting Twitter discussion with a couple people that I had. It's a topic that don't think I've really covered before on this channel, but it was very interesting, so I thought I would go over it really quick on a video. And that is muzzle loaders for prepping or preparedness purposes. Someone had mentioned that they don't see why more preppers aren't into muzzle loaders because you could become fairly self-sufficient with it, even to the point of making your own gunpowder, which is something that's much more long-term sustainable than even reloading your own cartridges. Because even though you could reload cartridges, you can't exactly make your own cartridges and primers without having quite a bit of an operation, machining, different types of smelting, stuff like that. Whereas you can kind of make some field expedient gunpowder technically. My thoughts on this were, it goes back to what I've mentioned in videos before about don't be a what-if prepper. And for the self-sufficient argument, yes, technically you might be able to make your own gunpowder in a, medieval kind of way. First of all, it's not technically probably true for most people without storing equipment, because unless you're in an area that has certain like ammonium nitrate or saltpeter type chemicals in your natural environment, you're going to have to still store some of those supplies to make it. And even if you do make it, it's not going to be the same quality gunpowder, very likely, that you would buy, or black powder that you would buy. So while technically speaking, you might be able to be more self-sufficient, this is a what-if scenario. If you're talking about extreme self-sufficiency here, that 10, 15, 20 years should hit the fan scenarios beyond where you would be able to just store ammunition, store reloading supplies, and things like that. I mean, when you're talking about most brass casings can be reused several times, primers and bullets and the powder are not that expensive or hard to store. Finished, just complete cartridges, the pre-made, without any thought of reloading, are actually not that expensive to store either, when you're just talking about either like hunting or subsistence living. And certainly if you're talking about like fighting off armed bandits, then a muzzle loader is not something that you're really going to go to. So are you really preparing for a 10, 20 year totally, without rule of law, end of the world as we know it type shit hit the fan scenario? And if you are, I would challenge those people to look at all your other preps. If you're worrying about making bullets for 20 years, is everything else up to speed for 20 years of self-sufficiency without buying from the store? Do you really have your food, your health, your water, your transportation, your clothing, and all of that stuff squared away for 10 or 20 years? I seriously doubt it. And most people, they're not really planning for that level of a shit hit the fan scenario. So there's no reason to, and this is what I've talked about in my past videos, there's no reason to worry specifically about one level of preparation, getting your ammunition squared away for 20 years when you only have 6 months supply of toothpaste or water or food. This just doesn't make any sense. And even beyond self-sufficiency, there's just not that much capability of a muzzleloader compared to a modern firearm. The guy that I was talking to on Twitter made the comment, the things that I shoot with the muzzleloader don't know that they've been hit with the muzzleloader, they're just as dead. And that's absolutely true when it comes to, hunting or something like that, or even killing a person. But that goes back to what I was saying, that the same could be said for using a spear or a hatchet. It doesn't mean that it's a better choice for that situation just because of one particular element that you've chosen, which is the long-term self-sufficiency. I think that's the only thing that you could come up with that would really make a muzzleloader a superior choice over a modern firearm like this AR-15 in any real way, because in 99.999% of random scenarios, you're going to be better off with a modern firearm. Even if you didn't know what the scenario was. If you just said, you're going into a scenario where you're going to need a gun, you have no idea what it is, what are you going to choose? The muzzleloader just based on the fact that it might be a situation where you can make your own ammunition? I don't think so. That's not really a compelling reason to me. One of the other things that they mentioned was ammo versatility. Now that's true, you can't, not necessarily ammo versatility, but you can change the load. And you could theoretically put different types of ammunition there as well. You could use shot versus one pellet versus you could just stick something in there, I guess, in an emergency, as long as you had the powder. But there is versatility with a black powder muzzleloading weapon, but there's a lot of versatility with other weapons as well. Something like a 12 gauge shotgun, you can use a huge variety of different types of ammunition. Everything from non-lethal to pyrotechnic incendiary ammunition to pellets, all the way from birdshot up to buckshot. You've got rifled slugs. You've got all sorts of ridiculous shit, and you can even make your own, load your own ammunition for that as well. So there's quite a bit of versatility. So even if there might be a little more with the black powder weapon, which I doubt there is anyway, but even if there might be, that little marginal difference you get in versatility of, load size is not worth all the other disadvantages that you would have versus a modern firearm. And I mean, in an emergency, if you have a weapon like this, yeah, technically you could maybe make a muzzleloader as weak as a 22 or as powerful as a 12 gauge Magnum slug, but in what situation you're talking about here, shooting a dove versus shooting a moose or something like that, if it came down to it, you could shoot small game. You could shoot a squirrel with this. It might blow its head clean off, but it'd still work. You could shoot bigger game with it too as well. And I'd much rather have that type of issue to deal with than be in a situation where you have a muzzle loader and you need a higher capacity, more powerful weapon. With a copper-plated bullet or something like that. Because think of a situation where you want a muzzle loader, not being able to have it, the consequences would be relatively minor compared to the flip side of being in a situation where you need a modern firearm and you don't have it. You only have a muzzle loader. So there is, of course, no reason why you couldn't technically have both, but I just don't see a compelling reason why a prepper, for only purposes of preparedness. You can have all sorts of weapons for any other sorts of reasons. The vast majority of weapons that I have are not for strictly preparedness purposes. They're because I like weapons. I like having different capabilities. So you could certainly have one, but I would not say that's something you need to get for preparedness purposes. It just doesn't make any sense to why you would need that versus a modern firearm. The maybe technically advantageous aspects to a muzzleloader versus, or even not even necessarily a muzzle loader, but a black powder weapon, it could be a breech loader, I guess, versus a modern firearm are just not compelling when it comes to how often or how realistic those scenarios might be. To me, the argument is very similar to when people say, oh, I knew this guy who he was in a car accident and he only survived because he was not wearing his seatbelt and he was flung free of the burning wreckage and there's a big piece of metal stuck where his head used to be, and if he'd been wearing a seatbelt, he'd be dead. And while that technically may be true for that situation, are you going to go around not wearing your seatbelt just because that might happen, when it's much more likely, hundreds, maybe even thousands and thousands of times more likely, that you'll be in a situation where the seatbelt saves your life? And same thing with the modern weapon. Are you willing to give up all that capability just for the chance to carry around a black powder weapon on the off chance that some shit the fan scenario might last for 20 years and then you can theoretically start making your own gunpowder? Certainly I'm not. If that's what you want to do, go for it. I'm not going to tell anyone what to do. If you are going to do that, at least do both. Certainly don't rely solely on a black powder weapon. And none of the guys I was talking to were suggesting that. But I just don't even think it's really worth bothering for preparedness purposes. If you want to do it for hunting, for just gun-related, enthusiastic, hobby type stuff, go for it. But for purely preparation and preparedness purposes, I don't see any compelling reason why you need to bother owning a black powder weapon. And I think all the capabilities that you would need are taken care of with modern weapons, especially if your prepper mission statement, which I think everyone should have, did a podcast on that a while back, link will be in the description, especially if your preparation mission statement involves preparing for anything less than 10 years, certainly anything less than 5 years. Personally, my prepper mission statement is I want to be self-sufficient for 6 months, because that covers 99.9% of all shit hit the fan scenarios throughout history by being self-sufficient in terms of food, ammunition, water, fuel, ability to cook, minor first aid type stuff. For 6 months, that takes care of almost everything. So I'm not preparing for a scenario where I'm going to not be able to go to a store or get any sort of resupply for 10 years. If I was, then I might look into something like that, but I don't think that's a realistic scenario. And even if you are preparing for that scenario that's unrealistic, you better make sure all your other shit's up to par for 10 years too. There's no point in making sure you can make ammunition 10 years down the road if you can't even purify your water 10 years down the road, or if you don't have any sources of food 10 years down the road. So that's my thought on the subject. Definitely get yourself a modern firearm, because there are plenty of scenarios you can come up with where these would be much better. In virtually all scenarios, all realistic scenarios that you could come up with. A modern firearm with a higher capacity, an ability to change magazines, and resilient ammunition. It can't really, you know, even if you drop your gun in the water and pick it back up, things still gonna fire, things like that. All of those elements about why people use these type of weapons now instead of black powder weapons, that's why they're better for preparedness purposes, because they're just plain better. And that's my thoughts on the subject, and I appreciate talking to the guys on Twitter. They had some good ideas, made me at least think about stuff, but those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think, and if you think black powder or muzzle loading weapons do have a place in preparedness beyond just wanting to have them for yourself. If you think they actually have a very specific role, I guess, for preppers beyond what I'm envisioning here, because I don't see it. But let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching.